Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel titled Overcoming Hatred and Teaching the Next Generation. My name is Jörg. I'm a political scientist and former director of Berlin-based non-profit policy advice on education. I'm very pleased to welcome high-level experts that deal with the issue in different areas of work. Warm welcome to Deidre Berger. Deidre has served since 2000 as director of the American Jewish Committee's Berlin-based Lawrence and Lee Rama Institute for German-Jewish Relations. In that capacity, she advocates for a strong transatlantic partnership with representatives of governmental and non-governmental organizations. You're working closely with German and European partners on a wide range of issues, including European security issues, Middle East affairs, and anti-Semitism and extremism. Yes, that's okay, you know. I welcome Professor Mohammed Dajani, Palestinian professor and peace activist, founder of the so-called Wasatia movement in Palestine. You later will explain this term, and director of the Wasatia Graduate Academic Institute. I also welcome Markus Sheff, CEO of Impact SE, a research and policy non-profit that analyzes textbooks, employing standards on peace and tolerance according to international declarations and resolutions. You have briefed prime ministers, members of Congress, and national leaders from around the world, and spoken at legislatures including the European Parliament, Westminster, the Finnish Parliament, the German Parliament, and others. Thank you very much. Later, you will have the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists, and I just begin to ask questions to Deidre. Deidre, from your point of view, what is the significance of education in terms of enhancing the well-being of the Jewish people and Israel and advance human rights and democratic values around the world?
Okay. Thank you, Jörg. I'm delighted to be here today. Can you all hear? Good. Okay. Otherwise, I'll speak up more. You know, there's really nothing more important for us, for democracy, for maintaining our democratic values than education. It's the core, and we need to gather not just the knowledge, but also the skills to be able to acquire knowledge and to distinguish truth from falsehoods. This is a key goal and aim of education. And it's particularly important now in an area of so-called fake news, where all of you, I see lots of young people I'm glad to see here in the audience, yes, are coping with propaganda on a daily basis, and to a degree that certainly existed but didn't affect our daily lives in the same way growing up. I think the Jewish experience has shown us that with every move toward autocratic systems, the more hatred rises and our freedoms diminish. So there's no doubt that it's important to learn that as young people and to work for the advancement of freedom and liberty, to maintain Jewish identity and security, but in fact to maintain our democratic societies.
Thank you very much. Where do you currently see the biggest chances and challenges for educational work in general, from your point of view?
There are a lot of chances because I think there's more awareness now, and this creates openings. It doesn't mean that it's a great situation, but I think that for people with ideas and motivation, that there really are more places to enter into. And if we take the case of Germany, where there was very little 10 years ago, And there's now a plethora of programs and cooperation from local and state governments that didn't exist to this extent before.
Okay.
It's still a drop in the bucket, but that's why I say I think the openings are now there, and this is something new. I also think that, in general, the whole issue of understanding the threat that anti-Semitism presents to democracy and hatred and all forms of xenophobia, that it's a little better understood, at least by some politicians. Again, that means they're willing to commit resources. We're starting to see more positions, coordinators for anti-Semitism. We're starting to see governments spending money on education programs to combat anti-Semitism, to help foster a better understanding of Jewish life and of modern Israel. And I think that's very important. We're also seeing more international interest. And the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, has just issued a handbook together with UNESCO, who would have thought, on educational guidelines to combating anti-Semitism. It's pretty good, actually. So these are new things that I think create opportunities. Nonetheless, the challenges remain very large. The ignorance of the problem is large. We were just talking, you're at schools constantly. Teachers are... This isn't really on. That helps, actually. I do have a loud voice, but now I think it's even easier. We have, as I said, an explosion of anti-Semitism on social media in dimensions that we just haven't had to cope with up until now. We have schools with large numbers of children of migrant background who don't feel a link to their national history. This is all throughout Europe. So the challenge is, how do we reach them? How do we make them understand that as residents or as citizens, it's their history too? This is a very big challenge. We have the rise of politicians such as Jeremy Corbyn, who are legitimizing a very negative narrative about Israel that all too often descends into anti-Semitism, I'm afraid. We have teachers and administrators who don't have the tools they need to cope with this. And they may even sympathize with some of the positions that students are taking. Say, yes, Israel is the worst human rights violator in the world. So there's a conflation, I'm afraid, of stereotypes there. We have historical narratives that are now being crafted by European governments that diminish the importance of the Holocaust, of Jewish life, and that are rewriting nationalist narratives that emphasize and somehow create this fictional account of fascism and what it allegedly brought for people. And that's a real danger, I fear. There's a lot of other things, but I think the last thing to mention is that even amongst those of us who do address education in schools, there's not always a lot of agreement about how to do it. And I think one of the big disputes at the moment is that there's people who say, the biggest problem is really discrimination against Muslims, and I can't deal with anti-Semitism until we deal with this. Well, I would say both are problems. There's no reason to diminish one or the other, but if we want to address anti-Semitism, we need to do it directly.
What do you want the European politics to do in terms of best practices, Deidre? Okay,
I would like them to create, first of all, much more public awareness of the rise in anti-Semitism, the reasons for it, and to validate the fact that the Jewish communities in many European countries, if not most, really truly feel threatened. The Czech Republic assures me not, but they're a happy standout. I would like to see new ways that governments cope with reducing hate on the internet. It's a very tricky problem. I'm American, as you hear. So we're very cautious about interfering with free speech. Right. But the sheer amount of hatred and the amount of it that leads to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories is simply a new threat. And I think we do need to find new ways. The German government passed a law last year where they're trying to get a little of a handle on it. The Minister of Justice told me that there's a lot of interest from other countries. It was criticized at first, but now there is a lot of interest. And the third thing I would say is that we need to find ways to stop the demonization of Israel in European and UN or international forums. We cannot fight the problem of anti-Semitism as long as one country is, in an exaggerated way, attacked, marginalized, demonized, and we need to have politicians help people understand the importance of the relationship with Israel, which you're hearing in multiple ways today. You need to take these messages, please. But we need to spread this, and we really need people in key positions who understand that it's in Europe's vital interest, their own interest, to create stronger bonds with Israel.
Thank you very much, Deidre. Professor Dajani, I'm very pleased to welcome you. Let me ask, we switch to the Israeli-Palestinian relations concerning the education, and you yourself once joined Fatah, which advocated an armed struggle against the Zionist enemy to liberate Palestine. What changed your mind in terms of your biography? What experience was it eventually?
Actually, it is a human narrative, and if you allow me to share it with you, I was not allowed to go back to Israel between 1967 till 1993, and it was my first time I go back to Jerusalem, where my family lives, in which my father had cancer, and he was having medical treatment at Ein Karim Hospital, and so he was the one who facilitated my return to Jerusalem on a family reunion because of the fact that he had cancer, and so I used to drive him to the hospital, and then I was able to watch my enemy, the Israelis, who were treating him like any other patient, and not like an Arab or a Muslim or a Palestinian, but rather like any other Israeli patient. In the hospital itself, there were also many Palestinians who were receiving medical care. So I think that the good in the other has helped me to open my eyes to the good in me, in the sense of trying to erase hatred. And there was also another narrative. My father died of cancer, but another narrative later, that with my mother, where we drove to Tel Aviv, and then it was a Friday afternoon, and she had an asthma, and her asthma attack became very severe, and so it was Shabbat, and we couldn't get help from a pharmacy because her inhalers were expired. And so we drove her back. On our back, she had a heart attack, and my brother, who was driving, decided to take the Ben Gurion exit, and then at the gate, we found the soldiers. The soldiers inquired, and we told them that we have a sick woman. I did not expect them to help, she being an Arab, a Palestinian, and they, soldiers, required to take care of the gate at the airport. But however, it was not true. They immediately called for help. A medical team came over and tried to help my mother. So basically, and then they took her to a nearby military hospital where she died upon arrival. So actually, these stories that I have personally, in addition to many other stories that I heard from other friends, which are not reported in the media or by the people, I think opened my mind to the need that the land can accommodate both people, and that we should work for peace.
Thank you, Professor Dajani. You founded the so-called Rasashia movement. What does it mean in terms of education? What does the term mean? Maybe you can explain.
Yeah, thank you. It is a word from the Quran, and also if I would share a narrative for the cause of it, because I'm not into religion originally. My family has a heritage in religion. However, I studied in the American University of Beirut, and then in the United States. I have 2 MAs, 2 PhDs, but none of them related to religion. However, back in late in 2006, I was standing on the balcony of my office overlooking an Israeli checkpoint. It was a Friday morning, and there were hundreds of Palestinians coming to go to Jerusalem to pray at the Haram, and they didn't, because they were West Bank and didn't have permits. The soldiers were not allowing them to cross, and they were pushing them back and throwing at them tear gas, and I assumed that there will be shooting at the time. However, after a while, things cooled down, and it seems that there was an agreement between the soldier, the officer at the checkpoint, and the Palestinians, in which the officer brought buses. The Palestinians crossed the checkpoint, left their IDs, and then the buses took them to pray at the Haram, and then the buses brought them back to the checkpoint where they got their IDs and went home. And for 3 weeks that did happen during that month of Ramadan. And I was observing that and thinking, those are Palestinians, they are moderate and they are religious, yet they accepted to make a deal. They are not extremists. The question was who represents them. So there are in Palestine 10 Palestinian organizations and parties which are Muslim, and they are totally against Israel, totally believe that Palestine is an Islamic endowment, and that there should be no negotiation about it, and that the only way is to destroy Israel. So I thought there should be a Palestinian Islamic movement that could represent these moderates within Palestine. The word, I took it from the Quran. It is the second surah in the Quran which says, and thus we created you a moderate nation, a temperate nation. And so we use that in order to appeal to the religious people so that we can stand up against Hamas. And then Wasat means center. And so that's we are promoting a religious a moderate culture within the Palestinians, a society in face of Hamas that manipulated the Quran, the Hadith, in order to claim that Islam came to replace Judaism and Christianity, and that God is angry at Jews and Christians, and that Islam should replace Christianity and Judaism. So that's the work that we are doing.
Professor Dajani, you organized the first ever visit by Palestinian students to Auschwitz and other death camp sites in Poland. You know, what did the journey mean for the students' behavior and attitudes after?
It was the first time Palestinian students do visit Auschwitz. They are brought up in a culture of denial. They are brought up in a culture where actually it's anti-Semitism without realizing it is anti-Semitism, in the sense that the rejection of the Jewish narrative in total, whether the civilization aspect of it or other aspects, have caused them to actually be totally unaware of anything related to the Jewish history, particularly the Holocaust, and the books that are published in the Arab world about the Holocaust are totally extremely against the Holocaust. And even there are some books that were published about how Jews killed Germans rather than how Germans killed Jews during the Holocaust. And so the growing up in this, for the Palestinian students to come to Auschwitz for the first time and face that grim reality, it was very shocking for them. One of the students asked me, what does this sign on the gate mean? And Arbeit macht frei, thinking that this is a work camp, work concentration camp. And then she realized that it meant that the commander of the camp used to welcome Jews coming in by saying, abandon hope, quoting Dante, for the only way out is through the chimneys of the crematorium. And so she realized that this is a death camp. It was an awakening experience for her, because she was in Israeli prison for 9 years, and then all the time she was comparing her own experience with the experience of the people there, of the prisoners there. Yet that was a awakening call for her. The students, actually, one of them said the trip did not make me less nationalistic, but it made me more humanistic in the sense of feeling empathy for the suffering of the other. So basically, it did leave a lot of impact on the students. Unfortunately, when they went back, there was a backlash among the Palestinians, and there were demonstrations, and basically, I think because also there was incitement against the trip, so that students don't go again, or that against me personally, and the Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, wrote an article about the trip while we were there. But when the article was translated in the Palestinian press, there were mismanipulation of the text, in which the article said it was funded by a German research institute, and the translation was it was funded by Zionist organization. The article said it was sponsored by a German university. The article said it was sponsored by Israeli universities, and then it did not mention that there was reciprocity, in which we took also 30 Israeli students to a Palestinian camp where they met Palestinians there from the 1948 Nakba, and heard their story and all that.
Thank you. Mr. Dajani, from your point of view, I think it's a difficult question, but nevertheless, what is the way to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I think we have... I think of it as a very simple solution. I think that there is a solution. It's very wrong to think there isn't. But I think that the politicians are not really, on both sides, are not really investing in it, because they feel as if the people are not ready for it. I believe that the way to do it is through moderation. Our work has a cycle, in the sense that we feel that moderation will usher in reconciliation. Reconciliation will usher in trust and understanding, bringing in conflict resolution through negotiations, eventually leading to conflict resolution, to peace and democracy and development. And we believe education plays a major role in this. And it is not, there are elements within the education. It is not only the textbooks that needs to be changed, but also that the teacher also needs to become part of, and the teacher and the environment of the student, in which there should be a peace culture dominating within the community. I believe that's why we are starting a program, a PhD program on reconciliation, that will graduate people who are with a PhD degree, so that they can go back to society and be multipliers in the school, in the university, in the mosque, in different areas, so that they will bring in that culture. People say it's a long term, but we need to do that, because without the teacher in the class believing in the text that he is teaching, and without the text being a peace education textbook, then we continue within this cycle of conflict.
Thank you very much. Palestinian textbooks, Marcus. You know, among other things, your organization analyzes the current Palestinian curriculum.
Indeed.
Could you tell us something about the results, please?
I could. First of all, pleasure to meet you, Deidre, to be here with you, and Jörg and Mohammed, colleagues and friends. Lovely to be on this panel with you. If I could, just for a moment, talk about why we are here, why we're talking about textbooks. Textbooks are unique. Textbooks for children are the single most authoritative piece of information that they receive. They're physical, they're on the desks, they take them home with them. Where I come from, the Middle East, they are given by the state with the seal of the state on it. Children understand very clearly how important and how authoritative the information in textbooks is. And so, textbooks have the power to do two things, again, in my region, and not only in my region, across Europe and the United States. They have incredible power to radicalize young people. The first thing that ISIS did when they rolled into Mosul was change all the textbooks. But they also have this power to act as a barrier to radicalization. Textbooks can stop young people from acting out violence, even if they're getting information from Facebook, from Twitter, from Instagram, from other places. So we study textbooks using very defined standards. Deidre mentioned that there was an issue of standards. Actually, there are UNESCO-derived standards of peace and tolerance, and we look at all textbooks through that prism. That is respect for the other, respect for the individual other. Peacemaking is the way to resolve conflict. No hate. Economic prosperity, which is actually an important one. Gender equality and LGBTQ, which is not a UNESCO standard, but a standard we are now starting to look at all textbooks through the prism of. So, looking at textbooks through that prism, and just a wider Middle East, before I get into the Palestinian curriculum, there were good things happening in the Middle East. The Tunisian textbooks are actually, to some extent, meeting those UNESCO standards. Moroccans, King Mohammed VI, is really at least saying that he is making efforts to change the books. We'll see in a couple of years if that happens. In Egypt, Al-Sisi is changing books here or there. It's very, very slow, but it's happening. We know that in Jordan, that King Abdullah II took out surahs which were, considered to be extreme, and replacing them with more moderate surahs. A process which came under a lot of opposition. The Muslim brothers actually in Amman went crazy with it. Not all is rose in the garden. The Iranian textbooks are appalling. I'm sure I don't have to tell you. The Turkish textbooks, which were actually pretty good, as a result of the reaction to the attempted coup, we know there is now an injection of jihadi ideas into those textbooks, and we're going to be looking at those. Israeli textbooks do meet those UNESCO standards of peace and tolerance. Not perfect, but they do talk about peace as, ultimate. They talk about a Palestinian narrative, a national narrative. The Haredi, ultra-Orthodox textbooks, not so good. They don't incite, but frankly, they hate everybody. It's an issue, and it's an issue we brought to the Israeli Ministry of Education. So, Palestinian textbooks. Just a brief bit of history. Palestinians started writing their own textbooks in 2000 after Oslo. Before that, they were learning the Jordanian curriculum in the West Bank, Egyptian curriculum in Gaza Strip. In 2016, they created, with, frankly, pretty much total European funding, a brand new curriculum. It was phased in grades 1 to 4, 2016, 5 to 11, 2017, and finally grade 12 this year. And it is, frankly, desperately disappointing. It is a curriculum which is more radical than anything we have seen before, anything that came before. I would like to show you slides, but unfortunately we are technologically challenged, so I'm just going to have to tell you. To me, the single most important thing, and something which Mohammed alluded to, is what is not there. And what is not there is any horizon, any idea of what peace looks like. Any idea of what a two-state solution looks like, what two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace looks like. It doesn't exist. In its place is one state, one Palestine from the river to the sea. How will that be gained? Through martyrdom, through jihad, through violent sacrifice. And this is, both in terms of breadth and depth, as we say, absolutely suffused through the curriculum. That means it's from grades 1 to 12. It starts with grade 1 to 12, and across subjects. So it's not just Islamic studies, it's not just Arabic language, my beautiful language as it's called. It is also in maths, in physics, in chemistry, in biology. In maths, I can say here in Europe, people are told, add up the martyrs from the first Intifada, from the second Intifada, how many martyrs have you got? For very, very young children, letters are taught through the letter the letter for martyr and for attack. This is grade 1 children. It is a curriculum which creates a very dark and sinister future for 1.2 million young Palestinian children. And it's desperate, and frankly, it is to a great extent. Mohammed is talking about how important textbooks are. I think they have a supreme value. If you take a young person at 6, you put them through schooling, which ends up at 18, and through that schooling, year after year, all they have learned is it's about struggle, it's about sacrifice. Go out there and fight, go out there and sacrifice yourself. Images suffuse in the curriculum of blood, of violence, of jihad, historical ideas from Saladin in order to create a historical continuum, and a total lack of ideas of peace being reached through negotiation with the Israeli other. By the way, Israel doesn't exist. Israel doesn't exist on maps. It doesn't exist in a word. Israel is the Zionist entity or the occupier. This dehumanization of the Israeli other. By the way, there's an occupation. Let's not kid ourselves. There is an occupation, and Palestinian children are under occupation. However, there is a way to talk about the occupation in a manner which does not incite them to go out there and to kill and be killed. That is, it's 2018, and European governments are supporting this.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcus. At the moment, is there any chance for change, concerning the Palestinian Ministry for Education?
Yes.
As one of the main actors.
Okay, so I'm going to pass that sentence. There's a chance for change, but not through the Palestinian Ministry of Education. This is a major problem. The minister, Sabri Saidam, has no intention of changing this curriculum. It's a curriculum which he created for a very clear purpose. He's not going to change it. Officials within his ministry, ditto. They're not going to change this curriculum. So if the question is straight, are the PA going to change the curriculum? The answer is no. If there's a question of can the curriculum be changed through other ways and means, I think yes, we need to try and do that. And so to expand on that, it's all about the Europeans. The Americans are not players anymore. If you withdraw aid to the PA and UNRWA, for whatever reason, for right or for wrong, not getting into it, but if you withdraw aid, then frankly, you no longer have leverage. And, that is the practical application of that particular policy. So, and again, for right or for wrong, and it is really not for me to judge that. But I can say that the Europeans are really now the major donors. And when I say the Europeans, I mean the European Union through the Berger Fund, 300 million euro, not counting another about 300 grand in euro to UNRWA. The JFA, Joint Financing Arrangement, of which Germany is a key member, but that's Germany, Norway, Belgium, Ireland, Finland. Finland is actually the leader of it. And then European nations individually. Bring all that together, and, they are each also giving individually, like the UK, like Germany, like Belgium, and that is an enormous amount of funding. With that funding comes both the responsibility and the leverage to be able to say, listen, we're supporting the Palestinian Authority, but we are not prepared to support this teaching of hate, this radicalization of 1.2 million children every single day in schoolrooms. That's not the game we're in. We're in the game of educating Palestinian children for a better future, for a peace which, inshallah, we're going to reach, but not to continue to radicalize these young people. So that is the key. That's where we've got to get to.
So what strategy do you suggest?
So a few things are happening. Not completely wiping America off the map. There is legislation going through Congress at the moment, the Palestinian Transparency Bill, because, the Americans will be back one way or the other. Through the European Parliament, the legislation has gone through, first of all, through what's called the Cont Committee, the Budgetary Control Committee, led by a fabulous German member of Parliament, Dr. Inge Grassler, and also through the Budget Committee itself, the Budgetary Control Committee. Europe's a big player. And actually, it's German MEPs, not just in the EPP, but also the Socialists and Democrats who get this stuff. And so, legislation is key. You have to condition that funding on changing to the textbooks. It's not a threat. It is, just an absolutely reasonable request based on the fact that you're giving that money. In the UK and in Finland, they are both promised now to look at the curriculum, to review the curriculum, and to review their spending based on that result. I think Germany is next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, now it's time. Yes, now it's time. Please ask your questions to the panelists.
So this is a question for all of you. I work for Stand With Us UK in the United Kingdom, which is an Israel education charity. I want to ask a question about the statement or the accusation that we often see is that all education is political, and so as much as what you don't include in your education is as important as what you do include. The challenge we have in the UK in trying to educate people about Israel on university campuses especially is one, the fact that even the supporters don't know much about Israel to be effective educators about Israel, and on the top we're conducting our education in an incredibly hostile environment with BDS and anti-Israel groups dominating airwaves, and academics as well promoting a very anti-Israel, a very skewed narrative and experience, and so we end up finding ourselves on the counter responding with only talking about, for example, Israel in a positive light. And therefore we are open to the accusation of, well, you're not talking about the occupation, you're not talking about settlements, therefore you can't be sincerely educating about the conflict. How would you go about addressing that, and how would you, I guess, almost like give advice on the best way to educate when you're trying to reach an audience in a meaningful way, but you find yourself in such a difficult environment to educate in that way? Appreciate your comments.
It's a large problem. You're quite right. Where you find the balance and what kind of information and how do you reach students? I think we found the American Jewish Committee takes groups to Israel. We take about 25 groups of opinion leaders every year from Europe, from all over the world, actually, the U.S. And we take people to Ramallah. My boss, David Harris, just said, at one point I was sitting there with a group that I accompanied, and I thought, we're spending money to take people to Ramallah to hear Palestinian propaganda? Is this right? It is right. And I think it does need a balance, and there needs to be an acknowledgement of other people's points of view. And sometimes you can't convince with arguments. So I don't think it's wrong to share positive information, but people need to understand that it's in their own interest. I think this is another thing. Young people need to be reached in a way that it seems hip for them. We also need to find new channels of communication. And they really need to think that this is something that has something to do with me. And that's, I think, personalizing the stories is very important. The Holocaust doesn't work as in the way it did for decades, perhaps. If it did, we don't know. But I think there was a certain shock value that held people back in any case. That barrier is no longer there, and we need to recognize it. And that's why sharing stories of contemporary Israel, of diversity in Israel, and I think when you say a too positive picture, we have lots of stories about Israel, and some are positive, some may be less positive, but the very fact that there's diverse opinions, that there's a very free press in Israel, that there's a very independent high court, that speaks for Israel, even if there's people who some might not agree with. So that would be my recommendation.
Back in 2016, I was invited to South Africa by a Jewish organization, Hillel, to speak about peace, moderation, about my experience. And I was supposed to go to speak at Johannesburg University. And they said it was Apartheid Week, and it was Palestinian Solidarity Week, and it's dangerous to go to speak. But I insisted to include it. And once we got on campus, there was a big field in front of the buildings, and it seems that it was divided into in the middle by barrels with flowers. On this side, the pro-Palestine tent, a huge tent, and on this side, the pro-Israel huge tent. And the problem is neither are Israelis or Palestinians, but South Africans. And so my security were very afraid for me from the pro-Palestinian group to come over and disrupt the talk. And then I insisted to speak, and then they came over. Our group took the tent from the court and all the way to the other side of the court. The one pro-Palestine saw that, they carried their tent to the other side of the following them. So when I started speaking, they came to listen. So my message was simple. I said, don't import our conflict to your campus. Export to us your vision of Mandela's reconciliation, Mandela's rainbow, Mandela's pluralism. Don't be pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. Be pro-peace. And in this way, you are pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-reconciliation. And this is the message I feel that needs to be told much more on campuses, rather than to take one side and clash with the other. Take the carpet from under the other by carrying the banner of peace and reconciliation, and in this way you will be doing a service for both of us.
Well, listen, just to say, there is two groups of people speaking, frankly, most of the time to themselves, and then occasionally shouting at each other. And I think, having been there and done that, ran the Israel Project for 9 years in Jerusalem, if there was one big takeaway, and by the way, it's hard to disagree with Mohammed absolutely on that. But that paradigm of everybody in their echo chambers and then meeting on the field of battle when a speaker comes in order to yell at each other their pre-prepared messages. How helpful is that really? Frankly, and at the end of the day, there is an awful amount to be proud of in relation to being an Israel supporter. It's my country. It's a wonderful country. We're doing exceedingly well in every single aspect of our life, in health, in welfare, in high tech. Our economy is booming. We are in the middle of a conflict, and frankly, as far as I can see, we're in the middle of a conflict with people who have turned down peace agreements. Most recently in 2008. As Mohammed said, the idea of talking about the possibility of peace rather than yelling at each other, about messages, just seems a better alternative.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
I wonder about the textbooks of Israeli Jewish children. I tell you why. I saw once a very sweet film called Dancing in Jaffa. Have you seen that?
No. Sounds nice.
Good.
Okay.
It's a peace initiative of a Palestinian old dancer who lives in Paris. And he wanted to contribute to reconciliation of Palestinian Arabic kids and Israeli kids. And they found two schools who were willing to do the dancing as a classic dance. And when these Arabic kids came to the school of the Israeli kids, all the kids, as in the school agreed, but all the kids, you could see they giggled and they were, it was a new thing. But then a lot of the kids said, oh, if my father would know that I'm dancing with an Arab. And it was clear that they also learned a certain, they also had a picture which was not necessarily fortunate about the other side. So where
Well, okay, no, absolutely fair question. Listen, Israel is in the middle of a conflict with the Palestinians in the same way that the Palestinians are in the middle of a conflict. Having said that, it is the responsibility of both those societies to educate their children to peace, because it makes an awful amount of difference, and as I said, it mitigates behavior in relation to violence. So what you're talking about is children, Jewish children dancing with Palestinian children, and then wondering what their parents would think. That is a long, long way from acting out violence. And I think the reason that mitigation comes from an Israeli curriculum which is a robust peace education. It took a hell of a long time, by the way. In the 1950s, it was, as we say in Hebrew, ala panim, not really very good indeed. In the 1980s, things began to change. Interestingly, 2000, in the Intifada, it really took a great leap forward. And there are specific elements which run through the Israeli curriculum which I think are incredibly valuable. One is the idea of peace. It starts off with me throwing glasses around. It starts off with what we call Shir Shalom, the song of peace, which, every Israeli kindergarten child sings. It goes through to a more sophisticated idea of what peace should look like. The idea that the way to resolve conflict is through peaceful negotiation. Reams and reams of education in relation to peace agreements with Egypt, with Jordan, Oslo, why agreement, how these things came about, why they didn't work, children being asked, if it didn't work, why it didn't work. Peace is the absolute ultimate manifestation of conflict resolution in the Israeli curriculum, and to me that is extraordinarily valuable. So the Ministry of Education is doing its job. Whether these kids' parents are doing the job, I don't know, but the Ministry of Education is doing its job. The second thing is in relation to Palestinian national identity. The Israeli curriculum goes beyond, and when I say the Israeli curriculum, I mean the state religious. I won't go into too much boring detail, but it goes beyond, if you like, cultural and religious aspects of Palestinian national identity to national identity itself, a Palestinian presence before 1948, Nakba. Anyone doesn't know what Nakba means? So Nakba appears in the Israeli curriculum. In the latest civics textbook of Mr. Bennett, nobody can call him a lefty, there are 5 mentions of Nakba in the new Israeli civics education textbook. So, and children are asked, what happened to Palestinians in 1948? They're shown pictures of refugees and asked, what is happening to them? So, there's... By the way, not perfect. Ethnocentric, most curricula are. Very much about Jewish Israeli victimization. Well, there's a history of Jewish Israeli victimization, so you have to be really postmodernist to have a problem with that. But, essentially a robust curriculum for the vast majority of Israeli children. Haredi children, it's a whole different story. Again, not incited, but they're not given any national education at all. It's walls kept around them. So the long-winded answer to your, very good question is the state is doing its job in making sure that children understand what peace looks like, understand who Palestinians are, and to me that is absolutely key.
And then I became an Arabic teacher. And I had to teach children after terror attacks and so on, and come into class and say, children, this is even more important today, that you learn, that we understand the others. When I used to go to teacher further studies, I saw films and movies of people of memory. memory was, you know the clips, with terrible clips, exactly what you said. The extremism of first graders who, and every summer school feasts, the family came and the children had nothing better to do than to have a role play about Israeli soldiers and terrible, and they shoot, and first graders. And I was so happy about all the peace process. I said something will move. Also in the Israeli society, also there we have opposition. And of course, at the Palestinian societies, because at the end of the day, we are our neighbors. And what you said about the curriculum shocks me, actually. So the question is, how come there is a process, the European Union and other powers encourage the Palestinians and help and support. How come this is the result? Because we should not, maybe it's the politicians who are very old and I don't know, they're from the next generation, the older version, I don't know. I just know this is not the future we want for our children. So are there some forums or somebody in this process who helps, who just,
Yeah. Okay. So the answer is, the question is, why do the Europeans, fund this? So, I can go Bet Hillel, so to speak. A more sympathetic view, which is they don't know. They do not know what is in the curriculum. That used to be the case. Now they do know. One could also, of course, go Bet Shammai and say they don't care. I frankly prefer to believe that they do care. I prefer to believe that members of the European Parliament, again, doesn't matter what party they're from EPP or the Greens or the Socialists or whatever, they don't want to pay to radicalize children anywhere. They don't want their own children to be radicalized. Why should they want Palestinian children to be radicalized? Nobody wants that. So I genuinely prefer to believe that given the right information, they can go so far. Now, the question is, how far can they go? We're dealing with politics here. None of us are naive. And, we're dealing with a paradigm within Europe of, frankly, the Europeans funding Palestinians. It is a paradigm which, ultimately you ask, European politicians why, and they will say, a whole bunch of things, all of them very worthy, but one really important one to me, which is because we need to maintain Palestinian civil society so that we can reach a two-state solution. So, the simple question is, fabulous. Where is the two-state solution in the Palestinian curriculum? Why is there no expression of an Israel and a Palestine living side by side? Where is there no expression of the Israeli other with whom they're going to make peace so that you can have this two-state solution? How is this going to come about when generation after generation are educated for the opposite? One state, river to the sea, no Israel, just Palestine. So if that's what you really want, you better change the damn curriculum and you better do it now.
Actually, let me give you an example. In the early curriculum, there was the way they explained the religion was very insightful. To give you an example, they use so many quotes by the Prophet rather than by the Quranic text. And most of these quotes are misquotes or would not hold true if compared with the Quran. To give you an example, Al-Fatiha Surah another example. There is a hadith that used to be written before in the text. And the hadith used to say that the Prophet said on Judgment Day, Jews and Muslims will have a battle, and then the Muslims will win the battle, and the Jews will hide behind the tree and the stone, and then the tree and stone will speak and say, come, there is a Jew behind me, come kill him. So there was pressure on the Palestinians about this quote, and so it was deleted, but what it was replaced by saying what happens, it is an exercise to students which says what happens on Judgment Day And what will the trees and stones speak? So actually, as a European, you do not have anything against that, but the teacher will bring into the class that story. Also, for instance, Al-Fatiha Surah. The Saudis have been printing the Quran in which they will put the Al-Fatiha explanation for Al-Fatiha, in which they write down there the last 3 verses of Al-Fatiha says, guide us to the right path, the path of those whom you have blessed, not those with whom who incurred your anger or who are gone astray. So basically, the way it should be taught that the blessed are the pious, God is angry with those who deny Him, do not believe in Him, and the astray are the hypocrites in between, thinking they claim to believe in God but they don't. So here in the Quranic text, the explanation is the blessed are the Muslims, the Jews incurred the anger of God, and the ones going astray are the Christians. Now, they do not put that text to say it, but they will put an exercise saying who incurred God's anger, who went astray, who are the blessed. Yani read the Fatiha and say who are the blessed. And then the teacher, instead of teaching it is the pious, it is the people who are hypocrites and things like that, they will say, oh, it is the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. So basically, the teaching, that's why I believe it is so important, the teacher as well as the student, in which that we can make the teacher become more into peace education. Because here we have education being divided into 3 stages, or kinds. There is conflict education, there is national education, and there is peace education. So actually when I asked the Minister of Education, the one before this one, why is it that we are teaching our students about Haifa and Yafa in Palestine when you acknowledge the state of Israel? And his answer was, because this is national education, once we have final peace, we might change it to peace education. I said, but if you put these ideas in the kids' minds, these people who will grow up, they will never want to actually change that. There will never be time for peace education.
Exactly.
But this is really the problem that we are facing there.
Exactly right.
I think you could share with us some things about the German textbooks and the image of Israel. We heard about Israel and Palestinian textbooks. Yeah.
Well, we have to improve them.
Good question.
We have to improve them too, because, unfortunately, because there often isn't the truth on the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is a denial of Jewish presence in historic Palestine all over the centuries and so on. So, we're working on this and we should work together. Question?
What's the same question?
We should do a session on that. It's really interesting.
If I could just add to that, there really is a very significant problem. And there was a study that was done from the 2 countries. And the Israeli textbooks, as Marcus said, were seen as the Haredi is another problem, but in general, fairly solid. Also on their image of Germany was a slightly different approach. But the German textbooks were found to, by and large, have very one-sided images of Israel, and also the photographic material that was used, and there were very few that they found were balanced. In fact, they didn't think they were balanced at all. Teachers don't only use textbooks. They also bring in their own information. But there's now 1 chair for Israel Studies at the University of Munich for 3 or 4 years. Basically, there's been nothing, and that's 1 small faculty. So there aren't universities producing the teachers who can teach the teachers, and that's another problem.
So does the chair affect the University of Munich in what subject?
Israel, in Israel Studies.
In Israel Studies?
Yeah, not just Jewish Studies. But
Interesting.
Yeah, Michel Brenner.
Uh-huh.
addition to, yes, I agree we need to work on the German textbooks, but how can we actually commit the teachers that are already in schools, in German high schools, primary schools, where how can we commit them, or how can we help them teaching Israel? What can we do? Because what I see as a political science teacher in Germany, what I see is that lots of teachers are at least reluctant to talk about Middle East conflicts, about Israel, about anti-Semitism also.
Thanks for asking the question. AJC Berlin is working with the Berlin state government at the moment and the Teachers Institute to create a curricula on Salafism and anti-Semitism. And it was a 2-year teacher training program first. And what we discovered was that the teachers were lacking basically everything. I mean, just identifying the signs of radicalization amongst their students was one issue, and trying to better understand that. But they don't really understand the basics about Judaism, Jewish life, Jewish history, or they think they do, and they don't. They don't really understand a lot about Islam. And so there's students in the class who are being influenced by Salafist street workers who are announcing that they're the great experts, and the teachers don't have the knowledge to contradict them. They don't know how to deal with the Holocaust in today's framework, particularly in schools with large immigrant populations, and they really don't know how to talk about the founding of the modern state of Israel. So we have a curriculum that we're almost completed. We're going to try it out in Berlin, and let me know, I don't know, are you here in Frankfurt? Or?
No, Bremen.
In Bremen.
And we're working on it, so that...
Well, I'd be happy to share it with you because we're getting close to trying out the curricula. Be happy to have more people to try it. But you're right. It was all the things that we started out to teach became much less relevant than teaching about Israel, Judaism, Islam, and the Holocaust.
Interesting.
That's a question?
Yes. I'm one of these crazy members of the European Parliament. So...
Great.
Could I ask, so your name and the party?
Arne Gericke from the Family Party here in Germany.
And
now I am together with Bündnis C, another German party here, who is more Israel-friendly than the parties I've been working on before. And I was here a little late, so I missed probably quite a few important parts. But what are the basic informations we have here in Germany? Yeah, we have a lot of Muslims coming into the country now, which we apparently can cite and notice a lot faster than having Jewish friends at our side. Yeah, I would say. Anyway, I meet a group of young people in the bus, and with 2 ladies accompanying them. And one of those boys, a Muslim from his background, says, "Women are like a piece of chocolate." Now I was waiting, what would the others answer to that now? Yeah? And the probably Christian youngster said, "You can't say that women are like a piece of chocolate." Yeah? But what was his background? What was the background of the accompanying tutors or teachers or whatever? It was difficult for them to really give a detailed and adequate answer to what this young man said. So what is the background? How strong are my children as growing up as Christians to answer such a provocative statement? Yeah? And so I think the background is a lot weaker than probably the Jewish background if you live in Israel, I could imagine. So what are our basics? How far are we able to answer if we are put at, if we are questioned, if our belief is being questioned? And I think this is a very difficult thing. And thinking about the Christians here in Germany, I would wonder whether Jewish children in Israel would be a lot more firm in their belief to give an answer, because I could imagine Muslims are being already taught the Quran in very early age. Am I wrong there?
If I understand you, sir, and I think I do, listen, gender equality is a key UNESCO standard, and frankly, it should be a standard in textbooks all over the world. Within Israel, and the sectors are state religious, what we call the Arabic language, we call it Bagrut Ba'arabit, but the Arabic language and the ultra-Orthodox. So in those first three, those standards of gender equality, including, Israeli Palestinians, Israeli Arabs who learn that curriculum, standards of gender equality are very strong. Sadly, the ultra-Orthodox actually have a view of women which would be as expected. They are expected both to work and to, and to keep house, so that the husband in the house can study. That's something which does need to be changed. Looking at textbooks around the Arab world, gender equality is a variable. In the Syrian curriculum, it is, a little bit stronger than in others. It's essentially a Ba'athist country, and gender equality is not a desperate issue there. Turkey the same. Iran, quite appalling. In Iran, women in the curriculum are essentially vassals. In the Saudi curriculum, women are really objects, and they can be beaten. Etc. etc. It depends which country you are. It depends, of the politics of that particular country. But here in Europe, in relation to educating immigrant communities, I think the stress on gender equality and LGBTQ has to be made time and time again, no matter the opposition. And by the way, there's a lot of opposition. We know that in certain schools in suburbs in France, you can't teach about the Holocaust, you can't teach about gender equality, you certainly cannot teach LGBTQ. That's where authorities need to be a lot firmer. I had a conversation with one of your colleagues, who shall remain nameless because he wanted that to be the case. He was a mayor in Germany. He is now a member of the European Parliament, and he was very clear that within the city in which he was a mayor, which has an immigrant population, the schools cannot teach these values. I think authorities have to, frankly, get a bit more guts and, deal with these issues in the school, give the teachers the safety they need.
Okay, thank you, Deidre. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Professor Dajani. Time is running. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jörg. Real pleasure.